Peace in, love out, namaste. How you feeling, Sangha? There's a tradition in Zen known as the way-seeking mind, and it is an opportunity for someone to talk about their spiritual journey. And so I want to share with you a little bit about my background, how I came to practice meditation, lead, facilitate mindfulness sessions, and why I find value in the Dharma still after over a decade of practice. I grew up in Southern California, near the water. I'm a beach kid at heart, totally kind of hippie vibes. I get it from my mother, who has her own empath, hippie kind of vibes. In terms of faith, my family was a part of the Baptist church, and it was the pillar of the community. And so I found myself there often. I was in the youth choir, on the usher board, in junior deacons, in the plays and the skits. And there came a point where the pastor even prophesied over my life when I was an adolescent that I would become a minister one day myself. As time went on and I became a teenager and I began questioning the teachings of the church, the values that were held, what I believed, I slowly began withdrawing from the church and began to explore. Really, I began to read different books, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, Sufi mystics and poets. I began to study various faith traditions, and a little bit before I went off to college, I stopped attending church regularly. I just felt that it was no longer where I needed to be for where I was at in my life at that point. Even though I left the church as a regular attendee, I don't think that I left a sense of having a faith in something bigger than myself, of something larger. And so even to this day, I still have a belief in God, but it's shifted from the God that was said in a text or a book or the Bible to a way of expressing the unfolding mystery of life, the vastness of life. I can say God, universe, source, great mystery, consciousness, enlightened being, and still understand all those to be this essence that I'm trying to communicate as God. When I went off to college, I went to an HBCU in Virginia near the Chesapeake Bay, and I chose that location, one, because I was trying to find my identity. I was trying to find a sense of where I belonged, and I thought that I would find it there. When I arrived at the school, at the university there, found out that going to church was mandatory. There was this kind of dress code. They were really big on trying to mold you into their idea of who you should be, right? What your values should be. And I just found a tremendous sense of resistance, internal resistance, that this just wasn't the place for me. I actually spent a lot of my time off campus towards the stables that they've held a few miles down the road. I would spend all my weekends shoveling manure of the horses from the stables. So I would clean the stables, I would clean off the horse hooves, I would brush the horses down, and then I would spend the rest of the day just riding these beautiful quarter horses all along the pastures and feeding them. And I just found this to be such an awakening experience, and I just felt so attuned. So I can be an introvert and a little awkward at times. My personality in general, when I meet someone new, is kind of reserved. And generally how I'm perceived by people when they first meet me is that they feel that I can be a little austere and a little distant. But inside, there's a deep warmth and a deep sense of care that is within me. So I left that school after a year, and then I bounced around to a couple of other schools for a while before I finally ended up in Monterey, California. There was a military base that had been decommissioned right there on the bay. And so I like the idea of that what was once used for war would now be used for knowledge. I packed all my stuff up in the car and I drove through the Salinas Valley for the very first time in my life. And if you ever read Steinbeck, he writes so eloquently about the Salinas Valley, and it's an absolutely stunning place to see. When I arrived at the campus for the first time, the first thing I saw when I got out the car was a student walking across the quad, the grass, barefoot. And something within me just said, this is what I've been looking for, right? This is what I've been waiting for. Just this sense of exploration and discovery and just freedom to find out, who are you? What do you want out of life? And not necessarily be told, this is who you are, and this is what you need to believe, right? It was almost as if it was a blank slate. It was cross over a set of dunes, and I would sit and watch the ocean for hours, right? And it was a contemplative experience. It was there at the university that I was introduced to yoga. I would go every day just to get my body into alignment. I also had a professor of human sexuality who literally wrote the textbook on human sexuality. And she talked about this Zen monastery known as Tassajara. And I went to Tassajara and experienced that. And I had another professor who would talk about meditation, and we learned how to meditate in class, and we learned about mindfulness. And it all just felt so real. It just felt like it resonated, like, this is it. This is what I was needing. This is what I've been searching for. It's almost like it was a homecoming. Each time I found a new tradition and a new practice, it said, this feels right. This feels right. After college, I came back to Los Angeles, had to find a way to pay back all these loans. And so I got a job working as a bank teller. And even in the bank vaults, it could have been seen as a sort of spiritual deepening as well, because I learned how to deepen qualities of stewardship. How do you care for things that you see as valuable? We always had to engage in dual custody, or this sense of watchfulness. We always had to really pay attention to what was being given out and what was being taken in. This idea of reciprocity or exchange, that it always had to be in a place of balance. I learned about harmony, that every day we had to balance the safe and balance the vaults, that everything had to come back into balance every day. And so it's very interesting that banks know that this has to be done daily, right? That this aspect of care and watchfulness and mindfulness has to be done daily and with each exchange. How come in our day-to-day life, right, is that so difficult? Sometimes I just think that for many people, they can find so much insight into mindfulness in their day-to-day life, in their daily work, in their daily career. Sometimes we think that it has to be found in a studio or in an ashram or on a mountaintop. Really, your day-to-day work, right? Your garden, whatever that is, whether it's banking or teaching or startup or healthcare or law, whatever your garden is, the garden of your work, the garden of your career, it teaches you so much about how to deepen into a practice of watchfulness and care. So I was working at the bank for a while, and I knew this probably wasn't for me long term, but I was still going along with it in the daily grind of it. And one day I started having this series of intense visions about hills. I started dreaming about hills. I started seeing the hills when I was counting money. I started seeing the hills when I was going to work and driving home from it. And these hills just became a vivid part of my life. One weekend, I found myself going to get a beignet in downtown LA at this restaurant called Bottega Louis. It was supposed to be this French-inspired cafe, just these luminous glass floor-to-ceiling windows. It had marble countertops, and all of the workers were dressed in these kind of French chef's uniforms. It was absolutely perfection, and the beignets were delicious. And so as I was leaving Bottega Louis and I was getting ready to take a bite of the beignet, there was an older gentleman who approached me and he said, that looks exquisite. And he says, I'm a baker. I know good food when I see it. And I said, I absolutely love these beignets. And he said, maybe I'll get me one. But first, can you tell me which way the train is? Because I'm looking for the train. And so I pointed and said, the train is that way. It's just a couple of blocks away across the street. The baker, who to this day, I still don't know his name and have never seen him again, said to me, thank you for helping me find my way. Perhaps I can return the blessing and help you find your way. I am a baker in the hills of Costa Rica. The next day, I was determined that I would go to Costa Rica. It could have been God incarnate showing up as a baker in human form, universal energy, whatever you want to call it. I took that as a sign that I was supposed to go to Costa Rica. And so I put in my notice at the bank. I cashed in my 401k. I applied for my passport. I went to REI and got a backpack and a jacket. And I bought my ticket to go to Costa Rica, never having left the country before, not knowing what I was doing, not knowing where I was staying, but all I had was a website about hostels and a plane ticket and some 401k money that I decided to cash in. And I headed to Costa Rica. I spent a while just traveling around many of the surrounding countries within Central America. And so I would stay at a hostel and meet some wonderful people, and we would just talk about life. And they would say, you should go to Bocas del Toro. And I would go, you know what, that sounds great. I'm going to Bocas del Toro this week. And next week I'm gonna go to Puerto Viejo. And I just kept traveling around from city to city, not with any real plan. And one day someone mentioned a city called the Cloud Forest. And I said, what's the Cloud Forest? And he said, oh, it's an amazing time. And he talked about how he did zip lining and he had the biggest party there. And it was the most amazing time. And I said, that is exactly what I need. So I bought a bus ticket and went to the Monteverde Cloud Forest. I woke up, I opened my eyes, and I looked out the window of the bus. And time stood still for me, because I was looking at the very hills that I had been dreaming about and having visions about and seeing constantly. Those same hills that I had envisioned were now passing by on the side of the window. When I arrived in the Cloud Forest, I was all ready for the party and the good times and the zip lining, but I found out that it was Semana Santa. That's the week leading up to Easter. And so everything was shut down. They weren't selling alcohol. Literally, they had giant covers over all the alcohol in the stores. You couldn't purchase it. So it was supposed to be a dry week. Then I found out that many of the businesses were closed and most of the people had left. And so the big party that I thought I was going to have really changed the whole dynamics. I thought it was coincidental or unfortunate that I had arrived during Semana Santa, but I now understand it to be synchronistic, right? It was intentional, volitional way by the universe for me to arrive in that place at that specific time. So I was cleaning up my room in the hostel that I was staying in, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something moving on the floor, and I saw it was a scorpion. I freaked out. I was screaming and I was getting stuff to just like try to slam the scorpion, totally out of my element. So I was able to handle the scorpion, and standing at the door was the person staying in the room next to me. I was asking what was going on, if everything was okay. And so I was explaining what happened, that there was a scorpion and I was trying to get rid of the scorpion. And so we began to talk. And I just thought it was going to be another conversation like I've had with many other people staying at the various hostels. But this story turned out to be a little different. Found out that she was from Kansas and she was going on what she called her final tour. And she had a terminal illness and she wanted to see the world before she passed. And the thing about it is that she was pretty young, fairly young. She was my age. And she was with her mother during that trip. And so we spent so much time talking about life, about what wasn't completed and what was left undone. She said that she chooses to live her life not by measuring how many breaths she still has left to count, but rather by counting each moment that the breath enables her to see. The beauty of it, the depth of it. And I've always appreciated that perspective in I have to pay attention to how I'm measuring life. Let me tell you, I was looking for a drink at that time because everything was just heavy. I thought I was going to party and have fun. And here I was learning about the depth of life. She mentioned that she went on the night hike before, and the guide who led it is also a shaman. And I was instantly intrigued by it. And so I went and got me a ticket for it. When I got there to the tour, I was the only one there. We were waiting for more people to show up. Nobody else showed up. And he said, this has never happened where it's just one person. He said, this night has been ordained for you. Okay, what kind of game is getting ready to be run on here? I went along with it. We got in the van and we talked, and he told me his story about being raised into this family of shamans. And eventually we arrived at the cloud forest. Right? We went into the cloud forest at night, and I don't know if you've ever gone into a forest at night, but let me tell you, it is creepy because there are all these sounds. There are all these strange movements. There are these strange breezes and noises, and it's a sensory overload. And so I had my flashlight out looking around everywhere, just like freaking out. Like, is that a snake? What do I hear? What is that? What's that insect? Is that a spider? Right? And he was just so calm, and he would laugh every once in a while. And he had this great sense of serenity and calm and says, there is nothing to fear here tonight. This night has been ordained for you. And so we arrived at this place where the trail began to bend. And he said that now it's time for you to walk ahead of me. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? I was getting really worried at this point. What's around this bend? You know, part of me just wanted to go back to the van, but then he said something that really brought clarity. He said, your destiny is revealed in your next step, and you find the strength to meet your destiny with this breath. Take the breath and take the step. And I took my breath and I took the step, and I turned through the bend, and there was a clearing that was just majestic. All around me was just this ocean of glowing amber and green lights. There were these incandescent beetles just beaconing these lights that were just luminous, right? Just radiating. It was almost as if it were a wonderland of just these beetles. Just, they weren't fireflies, but they were insects that had these two glowing lights on them. Some of them were amber, some of them were green, and the scene was surreal. In Zen, there is a tradition known as satori, or a sudden awakening, a glimpse of insight, a flash of awakening for your heart and mind, where your pineal gland expands, where your vagal nerve begins to shake, where the inflammation within your body ceases, where your heart expands, and you awaken. And that was the experience for me at the clearing in the Monteverde cloud forest. I remember at one point just falling on my knees and weeping, like just tears just streaming down my face uncontrollably, not knowing why. But in that moment, I knew I was in the presence of eternity. And I touched the very ground of my being. And such clarity was found and insight gained. And in a way, I knew what my work would be in life. I knew I would be called to create spaces like this, where people felt safe to slow down and reconnect with their hearts. I knew I was called into a contemplative path. That experience was so overwhelming for me, and I just couldn't handle it at the time. I rejected it. I went back to my hostel, booked a ticket for a bus out of there. I looked up surfing schools in Central America. I saw this beach in Nicaragua, and I booked my ticket there and said, I'm leaving. I now understand that I just wasn't ready, right? I wasn't prepared. So I arrived in San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua, found the surfing school, and spent the next few weeks just learning how to surf and just trying to forget about all that I had experienced. I went and I partied and I danced and I had fun, and I said, this is what I was looking for, not that back there. But an interesting thing happened. The 401k that I had been using to fund this trip in Nicaragua, in San Juan del Sur, it dried up. And so I had to head back home. I brought my plane ticket home within the few days of getting there. I actually saw near my house, near where I lived, was a Korean Zen center. I had passed by this very same building for years and had never seen this place before. It is there that I started sitting in the Zen tradition amongst these Zen priests, and they would wear these elaborate gray robes, and we would sit on these beautiful bamboo floors for hours, and we would chant and we would meditate and we would walk. And I was introduced to this beautiful practice. And so there's this process called taking refuge, where you can commit to becoming a monk, right? And joining the order. There was something within me that said, you know what? That's really not what you're meant to do, right? You're not meant to become a monk. I find tremendous value in it. The hierarchy, the authority, that kind of system, that really wasn't something for me. And so an interesting thing happened. I saw a job listing for a communications and social media person in Los Angeles at a local university. And so I applied, not really thinking that I would get it. I sent in my resume and I got a call back. And I was like, wow. So I went on the interview and the question came up, so what have you been doing? We see there's a gap in your employment. So I began to tell them about backpacking through Costa Rica and Bocas del Toro and Panama and all the places that I had been. I left out the Monteverde cloud forest story completely because I thought they would think that I was cuckoo. I told them about San Juan del Sur, how I was learning how to surf in Nicaragua. And the interviewer looked at me and was stunned because she said that she had just got back from surfing in San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua, like literally a few weeks before. I said to myself, there are no mistakes. This was synchronicity at play here. This was a universal order being established. We talked about San Juan del Sur for the rest of the interview and what it was like and how amazing it was. And there was just this vibe, this intense connection. And needless to say, I ended up getting the job. And while working at the university, I found out about their mindfulness center that they had there. And so I began to take classes in a more secular form of sharing mindfulness outside of the Zen tradition that I was more familiar with. And I began to really deepen into the practice. I began to go on meditation retreats, silent retreats, multiple week retreats, and it was really an expansive time for me, and I loved it. The program offered a certification to facilitate mindfulness classes in community and corporate settings, and I applied for that, and it was a very rigorous process. I was rejected a couple of times, but finally I applied again, and I was admitted into the program. And I found such a sense of completeness. And I spent the next decade or so really deepening and honing my practice and continuing going on the retreats and maintaining a daily meditation practice and reading the text and reading the Dhammapada and reading through the discourses that help shape the practice for me. And for a long time, I really kept an underground profile, but the events of 2020, the pandemic and the protest, it really awakened something within me that said, now is the time for you to begin to create the spaces. Now is the time for you to begin to do your work, what you're called here to do, to create the spaces, to bring into alignment all those years of practice, all those years of study. Now is the time. And so I am here today, one, not to necessarily teach, but to administer the Dharma, to hold a space for it, to be a safe place for individuals to see their own light within their hearts and within their minds. A space where people feel comfortable to touch the very ground of their being. That's why I'm here. That's my story. This is why I facilitate mindfulness sessions, because it's now time more than ever where we need to awaken to a boundless heart, right? An infinite capacity to meet all that life has to throw at it. Because let me tell you, if you look at any direction, this world will break your heart over and over again. And we need a way to hold the pieces, right? We need a way to contain it, to meet it all, and wrap it with compassion so that we can heal and be restored and find a skillful path forward. Otherwise, we will be ripped apart at the fringes. The Dhammapada says that hate will not cease hate. We know cultures around the world that have been in conflict for thousands of years. Well, the question becomes, how do we want to live? How do I want to live? It's a really big slogan today to say, I'm living my best life. And really the Dharma and mindfulness and meditation that says, that's great, that's a cool starting point, but you're called to something more, to something greater, to something fuller. I am here to help administer the Dharma so that individuals can say to themselves, if they so choose, maybe my best life is my starting point, but it won't necessarily be my finishing point. I'm called to something greater, to something more. I'm called to cross over that shore and awaken a boundless heart, a luminous mind. Here to bring about wisdom and compassion, love and empathy and equanimity. So that's what I'm here to do. This is my way-seeking mind. Thank you for blessing me with your presence, and perhaps one day I will be able to return it back to you when I hear about your way-seeking mind, your spiritual journey as well. Until next time, namaste.